Hello, everyone. Welcome to City Views and our special segment, What's Cooking, with State Rep Michelle Cook. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing all right today. It's a beautiful day. How are you?
It is a beautiful day, and I can breathe.
Yes, you can. And we are blessed to be able to do that.
Can't take it for granted anymore, that's for sure.
No, you can't.
So, Michelle, a lot's going on in the world. It seems like each week we have our conversation, things just get more and more crazy.
They do. And you never know what happens tomorrow. And I think that this is just definitely a very trying time for our country as a whole in so many reasons.
That it is. However, before our interview, I was just checking out the funeral services for George Floyd, and man, it's just a heart wrenching situation.
I had it on as well. And, you know, I think that we all have to realize that regardless of what someone might have done in their past, I've had this conversation with so many people that everybody deserves a second chance. And when you talk about why this man was pinned to the ground and the way that he was treated, and the fact that the whole entire country has been able to watch the brutality that was experienced, that so many people have spoken about but never really witnessed on tape, truly brings a testament to where we are and just the biasness on things. My daughter said, Mom, she goes, what I don't understand is how this man had written a bad check and he was taken down on the ground and then turned around and ended up losing his life. But we had a UConn student kill a couple of people, injure more in a 4-state manhunt, and he went down without an event. I just, when you're listening to this generation have a conversation and be able to rationalize it and really put some things together, I think we need to, for those of us that don't see this or have trouble understanding it, I think we need to take a pause and listen to this generation and let them explain to us what they see, and how they feel.
Well, it's ironic, isn't it? In terms of, I think our generation, for the most part, Michelle, dealt pretty effectively with the issues of race. I
Right.
think we've made some progress. Where we haven't made the progress, though, are in our institutions. And that is difficult for, I think, a lot of young people to understand, because they obviously have a much closer relationship to minorities and people of color than perhaps in the past.
And
And
and I think that I believe that is true. I remember when I went into 7th grade was when they started busing where I grew up, and we were, not that there were not folks of color in my community, but that's when busing started.
right,
And you're bringing folks from the inner cities out into the suburbs, and you're intertwining what in theory was what we were raised to be, two different groups of people, which showed us that we were all just one person. And at that point, some folks rode a bus longer than another folk. um, and moving forward from generation to generation, I believe that a lot of it has been lessened, in to the sense that, yes, we can all fight for the same jobs, and we can do this and we can do that, and we can ride a bus together and drink out of the same water fountains. I mean, so there are things that we've been able to do, and we can all vote. So there's been things that we've been able to achieve for racial equality, but we also should not lessen the fact that racial equality or inequality is still very prevalent, and a lot of it is taught. I often say that children are not born seeing color; they're taught it. And we don't. Children aren't born with hate in their blood; they're taught that. And it's just one of those things that we really need to take a pause and say enough is enough. If the best person for the job has a darker skin complexion than the next person, then that's the person that should get the job. And nobody should be lessened as a human because of where they are or who they come, where they come from, or age discrimination, any of those things. We must be better than that as a country.
I agree. Well, Michelle, it looks like we are on the precipice of reopening the state of Connecticut, and we are entering phase one. What's your
Sweetheart, we are in phase one.
We are in phase one, excuse me, yes. However, it doesn't feel like it because I'm telling you, people are still confused. Some people think that we didn't open soon enough. Some people think we still shouldn't be open. What's your view from the 30,000-foot range?
Well, anything that I'm going to say is never going to make everybody happy. So you're always very cautious of how that comes out. I think that it's vitally important that we start taking steps back to whatever normal will look like. But I also recognize that there must be a phase-in approach to this, because as we've seen in Florida, when they just opened the floodgates, they had 4,000 positive cases of COVID in 3 days.
Wow.
Now, I think that warrants, though, the fact that the numbers of people in the hospital or the people on ventilators is not what it was a month and a half ago. And that is a true testament to be able to flatten that curve, which we have talked about for so many weeks on this segment and in the news and everywhere else. The end goal to try to getting ahead of COVID and flattening that curve is to keep folks out of the hospital and off of ventilators. And to my understanding, as of right now, Charlotte Hungerford was COVID-free, which I think is incredible given where we have been in the past, couple of months. That doesn't mean that folks are not going to test positive for COVID. That does not mean that folks are not going to have symptoms, and that somebody might not end up in the hospital in the future. But it's our job as a society, as we've often discussed, to take precautions, maybe not for ourselves, but for those that can't take precautions for themselves. We know that this can be very airborne. That's why the masks are vitally important. We know that folks of compromised immune systems, elderly population, and the like are the ones that are very susceptible. We need to continue to protect them. And I don't think that we're going to ever be comfortable with a complete lift of what this might look like until we know there is a vaccination for it, or the antibody test is good and people are comfortable getting the test that they need to know whether they had it, have it, or they've got an immunity to it. So, but at the end of the day, I think the movement is vitally important. And as I've often said, we have to be patient, we have to be kind, and we have to be understanding. And whether it's not moving fast enough for some and it's moving too fast for others, we also have livelihoods of people that are vitally important to get back to work as well. And so finding that balance seems to be the very delicate conversation that we're having.
It is a delicate conversation, especially in light, Michelle, of the fact that there may not be a return to quote unquote normal.
And that's very true. And that's why I'm very cautious to say what it might look like later. I was watching an interview yesterday, and they said they don't think that we'll ever know life before COVID, like what it was then. I would hope that we get to a point where we're all comfortable taking the necessary precautions and we can get back to as much of that as possible. But we also have to be very diligent and not take things for granted.
Right. Well, with that being said, when is phase two set to be implemented?
June 17th. So it was supposed to be the 20th. The governor moved it up a few days. I'm not sure what the 3-day difference was, but the 17th it is. And, contrary to some of the naysayers out there, it's not because the governor's daughter's getting married on the 17th, because she's not getting married on the 17th. So So the 17th is where we are now. And I think that there's an element of this that it could almost be listed as almost like a mini. We had like a phase 1.5, and now phase 2, because we allowed the hairdressers and the barbershops to open on June 1st. I think that that's exactly what needed to happen. And we needed to see those phased in approaches for people to start develop immunities and get back the sense of security and comfort. We are going to always have folks that aren't. I've been delivering produce to the senior housing complexes in Torrington every week. Some of them are a little bit more comfortable than others, and some can't leave at all because they're so compromised. And we just have to be understanding that we don't all deal with things the same way. So, phase 2, allowing more people in gatherings. We just saw the lift from 5 to 10 and 25 outside. And, we've just seen the ability for some graduations to happen if you're under 150, and we know that summer camps are allowed to open. Whether they choose to open or not is a different story. But some, summer camps, the day camps, are able to open with obviously some restrictions involved, but that's for protections of all parties. I know that some of the preschool centers, the Torrington Child Care Center on Kennedy Drive, opened yesterday. We're putting people back to work. We have to have a place for their children to go. And, so it's going to be all of that, allowing indoor dining in restaurants, but at half capacity. It's really about the congestion that they're trying to lessen, so we do not turn around and see us, sitting right next to each other and breathing the exact same air. And then, especially if you're eating out, you can't feasibly eat with a mask on. So you do want a little bit of space. And it is allergy season on top of everything else. So
Right.
People are going to cough. People are going to sneeze. And we need to give folks a little bit of a distance for safety, protection, and the peace of mind, I think.
Now, Michelle, I got to put you on the spot. Okay. How would you grade the state of Connecticut's response up to this point to the coronavirus?
I would say I don't ever think anything's perfect, so I can't give you 100% or an A+ in that regard. But I would say this. I would say that I would give us an A when we talk about transparency, communication, and listening to the task force, which was put into place about reopening Connecticut and so forth and so on like that. I think that there was proactiveness when we were talking about protecting folks. Maybe it was too late in some of the nursing homes, and then in other areas, and I don't necessarily think it's a state fault as much as it is other issues that fell into place, that I would give a D or an F. When we talk about, having all of the necessary PPE on hand for a month, 6 months, or a year's supply, listening to the CDC guidance and saying that was how we felt, and not going above and beyond their guidance in my world is not acceptable. And I don't think that's a state directive. That's a CDC directive. And I think that when you talk about nursing homes and group homes and other things, I think we need to go above and beyond what the directive is and deal with your population as a whole. And if we have those folks that are on the front line caring for those folks in need, we need to give them all of the protections in place. I think that there's also an element of that CD range when it talks about explaining to people just what you might need to be safe. A facial covering is appropriate. We were very clear about that. But I think that folks that were working in group homes and nursing homes and assisted living centers, I think that there was some discrepancy and confusion as to what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate. And I believe that falls on their facilities directive, and we need to better that. The nursing home thing, as you know, weighs very heavy on my heart. And I've been in constant contact with the governor's office, and we have a women's caucus group that has been working diligently on a variety of different topics, because the nursing home was one of them. So we saw yesterday that the governor has called for an independent review of all of the nursing homes. I'm excited that he's doing that on something that's not exciting to talk about, but I'm happy that he's actually moving forward on that. We need to give a cumbersome overall look at what was good and what was bad, and how do we learn from that. But so I think that, I think that as a whole, we did very well. But I think that there's some subsections in this that maybe not we as a state could have done better, but other organizations could have done better. And then we figure out how to fix those things that were not appropriate and then make it better. God forbid we have this conversation again.
How does it look as far as the state getting reimbursed from FEMA for some of the coronavirus expenses?
So we just got some reimbursement down the line. I want to say yesterday. I know that each municipality also submitted what they had spent on COVID expenditures and sent that stuff to the state for their reimbursement. I don't know if we've gotten that yet specifically. But then there's also going to be expenditures that can be reimbursable through educational facilities that are going to be totally different than something else. When you're talking about laptops for students and needing hotspots for Wi-Fi, especially up in our neck of the woods where the Wi-Fi is shoddy at best most of the time. So there's some true expenditures that came with COVID that we were not prepared for, nor would you be prepared for that. You don't keep, $100,000 in the rainy day fund because you're anticipating a pandemic. So all of those things, I believe that that's not going to be an issue at all. I just hope that we can turn around and go forward and move in the regard of ensuring that whatever else that we might need is taken care of accordingly.
So with that being said, how is the financial outlook for the state going forward? And will the state be able to bear a second reoccurrence of this?
So obviously we did not raid our rainy day fund. As we talked last week, we didn't raid the rainy day fund for transportation costs. So we were sitting on a nice rainy day fund balance. We obviously were going to have to use a lot of that to help with some COVID expenditures to buy the time until the COVID reimbursement comes back. So, going into the next budgetary year, which we will not address until January in the new legislative session, we will definitely see ourselves in a deficit. The projection of that deficit, I think, changes from week to week. On a call with the comptroller last week, I don't think it's as bad as what it could be, but it's not as good as what we would like it to be.
Right.
So it's very hard for me to say right now what that number looks like in the projections. We could be looking at a few $100 million. It's just, I don't want to say a number at this point and then turn around and then in a week or two, somebody quotes me and says, well, representative said it's $1 billion. No, I'm not saying that. I think that we really need to get a final number first before we go that way.
With that being said, Michelle, how for parents out there that are concerned about what this school year might come out, what concerns you in terms of getting kids reintroduced to their educational norms and standards?
I really think that it's important for children to get back to school. I understand that there is an element of fear. I get it, but if the schools were to open up in August and my kids were still in Torrington Public Schools, I would let them go back to school in August. If there are children that have vulnerabilities, then those children should be able to stay home. If there are educators that are compromised, then those educators should be able to stay home as well. We need to be creative. We need to be able to lessen some of the fear, but at the same time, staying home becomes very tough, especially as we just discussed. Our connectivity is not ideal. If you're in a house of more than one child, that becomes very burdensome on your overload when it comes to your internet, Wi-Fi accessibility and speed. And we also know too that you do not want to educate via computer all the time. It's appropriate if it's in need, and it's appropriate on days that you, for whatever the reason. I envision snow days to be no longer anymore, as unhappy as that's going to be for a lot of kids, because we know that we can educate now through a computer system. But there's so much more to this than just the educational component. There is a social, emotional level of importance for these students that they are missing. And if sports have been canceled and camps have been canceled, and they're not opening the pools, like, so let's really look at the overall child and not just the educational component of the child, and recognize that it is so important for them to find that element of normal.
Right. Well, as we get ready to wrap up this segment, Michelle, you're going to be throwing your hat in the ring for another term.
I am. I have accepted the unanimous nomination from the Democratic Town Committee on May 20th to accept the run for state representative for my 7th term. I'm very excited about it. I know 2 years ago it was one of those years where you're like, is this the right thing or the wrong thing? And I think that right now, especially giving the times that we are in, I think that experience is extremely valuable to what we will be able to do when the legislative session starts come January. I don't take any of this for granted, and it's just been a true honor to be able to represent folks, and I would be honored to be able to do it for 2 more years, and to make sure that Torrington has that voice that they've been able to count on, and knowing that everything that Torrington's been able to receive from the state, I can continue to fight with and for, and bring those things back to town.
What issue are you holding close to your heart?
Well, as you know, nursing homes right now and how we can improve those, giving staff what they need. That's always been near and dear to me. It's something I've been working on for a while. So, definitely pre-pandemic. But I think that the pandemic has really just shined a light on the things that I've been fighting for over the last few years. Education is vitally important, and I know that we're fighting to get a high school here in Torrington. And if anybody questions whether or not we need a high school in town, so they should ask for a tour of that school, and realize we really do need one. Our students deserve better than that. And from there, it's those things that are always near and dear to my heart. It's insurance, dental insurance for kids. It's making sure that your prescription drugs aren't changed in the middle of your policy year by your insurance company. That's a formulary thing that I've been working on. How do we ensure that everybody has better Wi-Fi? I know that's a Representative Horn passion, that it really affects them so much more than it affects us here out in the further northwest corner. But I'm happy to help that as best I can, and always helping the veterans, the seniors. Those are the things that I think that we really need to ensure, especially now, when we see the vulnerabilities in our elderly population, our veterans that have, served and protected. We have a moral and ethical obligation to take care of those folks that walked this earth before we did.
Well, Michelle, it seems like our time, it just flies by now.
It does.
I never get to spend enough time with you anymore.
I know. We'll have to work on that. We'll have to extend our hours.
And as always, we're so grateful for the time that you do spend with us, Michelle, in informing the community on topics that are very relevant to them as well. So thank you once again, and we'll look forward to see what's cooking next week.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it. Stay safe. Be well.
Thank you.
It's about that time. City Views. What's happening in your city? City Views. City Views. City Views. City Views. You got love for your city? City Views. City Views. City Views. City Views. City Views. City